The red-eye flight from Denver to New York had settled into that fragile quiet that exists only at 35,000 feet, when most passengers surrender to sleep and the cabin lights dim to amber. Marcus Hayes sat in row 23, his 11-month-old daughter pressed against his chest, and watched helplessly as her tiny face contorted into another wail that cut through the pressurized air like a siren. 40 minutes. Emma had been screaming for 40 minutes straight, and Marcus felt every irritated glance land on him like a physical blow. He bounced her gently, desperately, whispering apologies to no one and everyone while his hands shook from exhaustion. 38 hours without sleep. 2 double shifts at the distribution center back to back, then packing Emma's things, then the drive to DIA through midnight traffic with a crying baby in the back seat. His flannel shirt carried a milk stain on the shoulder from this morning. Or was it yesterday morning? Time blurred when you stopped sleeping. The businessman 3 rows up typed on his laptop with unnecessary force, each keystroke a passive-aggressive percussion. An elderly woman across the aisle sighed loudly, then louder, as if volume could shame a baby into silence. A young couple in the row ahead turned in their seats, their matching noise-canceling headphones failing to mask their judgment. Marcus tried everything. He'd changed Emma's diaper twice since boarding, both times clean. He'd offered her the bottle 3 times. She'd pushed it away with surprising strength for someone so small. He'd walked the narrow aisle until his legs ached, and the flight attendant's sympathetic smile began to tighten around the edges. Nothing worked. Emma's cries escalated from frustrated to desperate, her small fists clenching against the worn fabric of his shirt. The plane shuddered through a pocket of turbulence. Emma's screams intensified, her face turning that alarming shade of red that made Marcus's heart race with parental terror mixed with helplessness. He was failing. Again. The same way he'd failed every night this week when Emma refused to sleep, every morning when he showed up to work with dark circles stamped under his eyes, every moment since Jennifer died when he realized he had no idea how to do this alone. Jennifer would have known what to do. Jennifer had been an ER nurse, calm under pressure, capable of soothing anyone. She would have positioned Emma differently, or hummed that specific lullaby, or simply radiated a maternal confidence that babies could sense. But Jennifer had hemorrhaged 8 minutes after delivery, and the best doctors in Denver spent 40 minutes trying to save her before pronouncing the time of death, while Marcus stood in the hallway holding his newborn daughter, trying to understand how he'd become a father and a widower in the span of a single afternoon. The flight attendant approached again, her expression caught somewhere between sympathy and professional obligation. Marcus braced himself for the polite request to please do something, anything to quiet his child. Then from business class, a woman emerged. She moved with the kind of quiet authority that made people instinctively step aside without understanding why. The flight attendant paused mid-sentence, her complaint dying unspoken. Passengers who'd been glaring moments ago suddenly found their phones fascinating. The woman wore an Armani blazer in charcoal gray, perfectly tailored, paired with black slacks that probably cost more than Marcus's monthly rent. Her dark hair was pulled back in a style that looked effortless but required precision. Her posture belonged to someone accustomed to boardrooms and command. She stopped beside Marcus's seat, her eyes sweeping over the scene with an assessment that felt clinical rather than curious. No smile softened her features. No warmth flickered in her expression. She simply stood there, tall and composed, while Emma screamed between them. When she spoke, her voice was low and controlled, carrying the weight of someone who never needed to raise it to be heard. "May I hold her?" Marcus stared at this stranger as if she'd spoken a foreign language. Emma writhed against his chest, her cries raw and desperate, and every logical thought in his mind shouted not to hand his daughter to a complete stranger on an airplane. But there was something in this woman's eyes, something that went beyond politeness or pity, something that felt like recognition of a pain he couldn't name, that made him hesitate. She didn't repeat herself. She simply waited, her hands slightly extended, palms up, as if she understood that trust couldn't be demanded. The flight attendant had stopped a few feet away, watching with obvious uncertainty. 2 passengers in the row ahead turned to look, their annoyance temporarily replaced by curiosity. The businessman stopped typing. Marcus glanced down at his daughter. Emma's face was red and wet with tears, her small fists clenched against his shirt. Her whole body rigid with exhaustion she refused to surrender to. He tried everything. Everything he knew. Everything the parenting books suggested. Everything his mother had advised before her arthritis made it impossible for her to lift Emma anymore. And now this woman, this stranger who looked like she belonged in a corner office rather than economy class, was offering to help. Something in her stillness convinced him. He shifted Emma carefully into the woman's arms, feeling the weight leave his chest in the emptiness that followed. What happened next would stay with Marcus for the rest of his life. The woman adjusted Emma with a practiced ease that spoke of deep, instinctive knowledge. She positioned the baby against her shoulder, one hand supporting the small head with exactly the right amount of pressure, the other pressed flat against the tiny back. She began to pat in a slow, rhythmic pattern, not the frantic bouncing Marcus had been doing, but something measured and deliberate. Her body swayed almost imperceptibly, a gentle rocking that seemed to match some internal metronome. Within 30 seconds, Emma's crying softened. Within 60 seconds, the desperate wails became whimpers. Within 90 seconds, silence. The cabin seemed to exhale collectively. Emma let out a shuddering sigh and nestled into the woman's neck, her breathing evening out into the steady rhythm of approaching sleep. The businessman closed his laptop slowly, staring. The elderly woman's mouth fell slightly open. The flight attendant blinked twice, then quietly retreated down the aisle as if she'd witnessed something she couldn't explain. Marcus sat frozen, his empty arms still curved in the shape of holding his daughter, unable to process what he'd just witnessed. The woman did not smile or make any gesture of triumph. She simply held Emma with a tenderness that seemed almost painful to watch, as if the weight of this small body carried a significance far beyond the present moment. The cabin lights cast soft shadows across her face. In that dim glow, Marcus noticed something he hadn't seen before. There was grief etched into her features. Not fresh grief that announced itself with tears and trembling, but the old kind that had burrowed deep and made a permanent home. It flickered briefly when she looked down at the sleeping infant, then disappeared behind a mask of control so practiced it must have taken years to perfect. She glanced at Marcus. Her voice came out quieter than before, stripped of its earlier authority. She was overtired. Sometimes they fight sleep so hard they forget how to surrender to it. Marcus nodded, though he wasn't sure he fully understood. He'd read every parenting book he could find in the months since Jennifer died, borrowed them from the library since buying them new felt like an impossible luxury. He'd watched countless YouTube videos at 3 a.m, phone balanced on his chest while Emma fussed in the bassinet beside his bed. He'd asked advice from neighbors, co-workers, the elderly woman who ran the laundromat on 5th Street where he spent every Sunday afternoon washing Emma's endless supply of onesies and receiving blankets. None of it had prepared him for nights like this, for the crushing weight of being the only one responsible for a life so fragile and so demanding, for the suffocating fear that he was doing everything wrong, that Emma would grow up damaged because her father didn't know the difference between hungry crying and tired crying, because he couldn't afford the good daycare where they sang songs and taught sign language, because he was just a warehouse supervisor making $18 an hour who couldn't give his daughter the life her mother would have provided. The words came out rough with exhaustion. "Thank you, I don't know how you did that." The woman was silent for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was lower, careful, as if she was stepping around landmines in her own memory. "I used to care for a baby a long time ago. Not for very long." She didn't elaborate. She didn't need to. The way she said those words, the careful distance she placed around them, the slight catch in her breath before the last syllable, told Marcus everything he needed to know. This was not a woman offering advice or showing off maternal skills. This was someone who had loved and lost. Someone whose arms remembered the shape of a child no longer there. Marcus didn't ask questions. He simply sat beside her in the half-darkness of the cabin, watching his daughter sleep peacefully for the first time in hours, and felt a strange, unexpected kinship with this woman he didn't know. Emma remained asleep, her small body curled against the woman's chest as if she had always belonged there. Marcus watched the rise and fall of his daughter's breathing and felt something loosen in his chest. A tension he'd been carrying so long he'd forgotten it existed. The woman shifted slightly in her seat, careful not to disturb the infant. She caught Marcus's eye, and when she spoke, her voice carried a question that seemed almost tentative. "Would you mind if I sat here in case she wakes. Marcus shook his head, gesturing to the empty middle seat between them. Please. She moved with that same fluid grace, settling into the seat as if she'd done this 1,000 times before. Emma stirred briefly, let out a small sound that could have been protest or contentment, then relaxed again against the woman's shoulder. A passenger across the aisle watched with open amazement, but said nothing. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The engines hummed their constant white noise, and the world outside the oval windows was nothing but darkness, punctuated by the occasional distant light of some town far below. Marcus realized he should probably introduce himself, should probably say something more than thank you, but the words felt inadequate. What did you say to someone who had just saved you from complete public humiliation? What did you say to someone who held your child like she was the most precious thing in the world? Finally, he managed, I'm Marcus Hayes. The woman glanced at him, and for the first time something like genuine warmth flickered in her expression. Not a smile exactly, but a softening around the eyes that suggested she appreciated the formality of introduction. Victoria. She didn't offer a last name. Marcus nodded, accepting this partial introduction. He was too tired to push for more, and something told him that this woman revealed herself only in pieces, only when she chose. Emma sighed in her sleep, and Victoria's hand moved automatically to adjust the blanket Marcus had draped over her earlier. The gesture was so natural, so maternal, that it made Marcus's heart ache. Victoria's voice came soft. She's beautiful. What's her name? Emma, after my wife's grandmother. Victoria's eyes flickered at the word wife, but she didn't ask the obvious question. Instead, she simply nodded as if she understood that some subjects required invitation, not interrogation. Marcus found himself talking anyway. Maybe it was the exhaustion. Maybe it was the strange intimacy of this darkened cabin, the altitude that seemed to separate them from the real world below. Maybe it was the way Victoria listened, really listened, without interrupting or offering the empty platitudes that most people reflexively deployed in the face of grief. His voice came out quiet, barely audible over the engine noise. My wife passed away. Complications after the delivery. She got to hold Emma once for about 12 minutes, and then she was gone. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with everything they didn't say. Victoria did not look away. She did not reach for his hand or murmur that she was sorry. She simply held his gaze with an understanding that felt earned rather than performed, as if she knew exactly what those 12 minutes meant, what it felt like to have everything and nothing in the same breath. Marcus continued, the words spilling out now that he'd started. I work double shifts at the distribution center in Denver, trying to keep the house, keep the insurance, keep everything from falling apart. My mother helps when she can, but she's got arthritis in her hands now. Can't lift Emma anymore. Most nights it's just me and her. Victoria was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. That sounds incredibly lonely. Marcus almost laughed. Lonely didn't begin to cover it. Lonely was a word for people who missed having someone to talk to at dinner. What he felt was something deeper, something more like drowning. But he didn't say that. The thought crystallized in his mind. Loneliness isn't lacking someone to talk to. Loneliness is drowning alone every night with no one throwing you a lifeline. He just nodded and looked at his daughter, sleeping peacefully in a stranger's arms, and wondered how his life had led him to this exact moment. Emma stirred, her face scrunching up as if preparing for another round of tears. Victoria reacted instantly, shifting her position and resuming that gentle, patting rhythm. Within seconds, Emma settled again, her small chest rising and falling with the steady breaths of deep sleep. The businessman in the row behind them leaned forward slightly, clearly impressed. Marcus found himself saying, "You're really good at that." Victoria's expression flickered with something he couldn't name. Pain, perhaps, or memory, or both. Practice, she said simply, and the word carried the weight of an entire story she wasn't ready to tell. The plane began its descent into New York, and the cabin stirred with the familiar sounds of passengers preparing for arrival. Seat belts clicked, tray tables folded. The flight attendant made her final announcements while the city lights appeared below like scattered diamonds on black velvet. Marcus could see the distinctive shape of Manhattan in the distance, that unmistakable skyline, that always made him feel small and out of place on the rare occasions his job required him to make this trip. Victoria returned to business class to collect her belongings, leaving Emma asleep in Marcus's arms. The baby hadn't made a sound since that miraculous intervention, and Marcus found himself replaying the entire encounter in his mind, still not quite believing it had happened. The wheels touched down with a gentle bump, and the plane taxied toward the gate. Marcus gathered his things, the worn duffel bag that had been his father's, the diaper bag covered in cartoon elephants that Jennifer had picked out when she was 7 months pregnant and still believed she'd be around to use it, the small cooler of expressed formula he'd painstakingly prepared before leaving Denver. He was fumbling with the straps, trying to manage everything while holding Emma, when he saw Victoria emerge from business class. She moved toward him through the aisle, a leather carry-on slung over one shoulder, ignoring the passengers who were already standing and reaching for overhead bins. Without asking, she took the diaper bag from his hand. "Let me help you." They walked together toward the jet bridge, an unlikely pair that drew curious glances from other travelers. Marcus was acutely aware of how he must look beside her. His rumpled flannel shirt with its milk stain, his 3-day stubble, the dark circles under his eyes that spoke of countless sleepless nights. Victoria, by contrast, seemed to belong to a different universe entirely, one where people always looked polished and problems were solved with a single phone call. At the end of the jet bridge, a man in a dark suit stood waiting. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with an earpiece visible beneath his close-cropped hair. When he saw Victoria, he straightened immediately, his posture shifting to attention. "Ms. Sterling, the car is waiting. The board meeting has been rescheduled for tomorrow morning." Marcus stopped walking. Ms. Sterling. The name echoed in his mind, colliding with fragments of news articles and magazine covers he'd seen over the years. Victoria Sterling, CEO of Sterling Technologies. One of the wealthiest women in America. The media called her the Ice Queen of Silicon Valley, a title earned through years of ruthless business decisions and an almost pathological avoidance of personal publicity. He had just spent the last 2 hours pouring his heart out to a billionaire. Victoria must have seen the recognition in his face because she turned to him with an expression that was almost apologetic. "I should have told you." Marcus shook his head, still trying to process this information. The woman who had held his crying baby, who had listened to his grief without judgment, who had spoken of her own loss in such raw and honest terms, was the same woman whose face appeared on Forbes covers and business school case studies. It didn't compute. The world he knew, of warehouse shifts and overdue bills and stretching ground beef across 3 dinners, didn't overlap with the world Victoria inhabited, where private jets and board meetings and decisions affecting thousands of employees were normal. A camera flash went off somewhere behind them, then another. Marcus turned to see a small group of photographers gathered near the arrival gate, their cameras already aimed in their direction. Of course, a woman like Victoria Sterling couldn't move through an airport without attracting attention. Probably some intern at the airline had tipped them off, made $50 selling the information about which flight the famous CEO was on. But Victoria didn't acknowledge the photographers. She didn't straighten her posture or arrange her expression into something more suitable for public consumption. Instead, she turned back to Marcus and Emma, her attention focused entirely on them, as if the cameras didn't exist. "Do you have someone picking you up?" Marcus nodded, finding his voice again. "My cousin. He lives in Queens." "Good." Victoria hesitated, and for the first time since he'd met her, she seemed uncertain. Her eyes lingered on Emma one more time, drinking in the sight of the sleeping baby with an expression Marcus couldn't quite read. Then she reached into her bag and produced a business card, simple white with black lettering, thick stock that felt expensive between his fingers. "If you ever need anything, please don't hesitate." Her assistant was already beside her, speaking urgently about schedules and obligations. But Victoria stood still for another moment, as if reluctant to leave. The photographers continued their assault of flashes, capturing an image that would appear in tabloids the next morning with headlines speculating about Victoria Sterling's mystery baby and secret family. Marcus looked down at the card in his hand. It contained only her name and a phone number. No title, no company logo, no indication of the empire she controlled. Just Victoria Sterling, as if she were any ordinary person offering help to a stranger. She was already walking away, her assistant and the man in the suit flanking her on either side. The crowd parted to let her through, whispers following in her wake. Marcus watched her go, the business cards still pressed between his fingers, and felt the strange sensation of having witnessed something significant without fully understanding what it was. Emma stirred in his arms, and he looked down at his daughter. Her eyes were open now, watching him with that peculiar intensity babies sometimes have, as if they see more than adults give them credit for. Marcus smiled at her, despite his exhaustion, despite the surreal nature of the past few hours. That was interesting, wasn't it? Emma blinked at him solemnly and said nothing. He was about to head toward the arrivals area when he heard footsteps behind him. Victoria had returned, her assistant trailing with visible confusion. Actually, she said, slightly breathless in a way that suggested she'd made this decision impulsively, there's a medical facility in the terminal, a private clinic. I noticed Emma was having some trouble breathing during takeoff. The altitude changes can be difficult for infants with respiratory sensitivities. She paused, seeming to choose her words carefully. Would you allow me to have her examined, just to be safe? It would only take a few minutes. Marcus's first instinct was to refuse. He didn't need charity, didn't want to become another story about a poor single father rescued by a benevolent billionaire. His pride had gotten him through 11 months of this nightmare, and pride was sometimes the only thing that made him feel like he wasn't completely helpless. But then he looked at Emma, at the way her small chest rose and fell, and remembered the frightening moment during takeoff when she had seemed to gasp for air between sobs. He had told himself it was nothing. Babies cry on planes all the time. The pressure changes affect everyone. But what if he was wrong? What if there was something he was missing? Some sign he should have noticed. Victoria seemed to read his hesitation. Her voice dropped, stripped of the CEO authority and leaving only the rawness underneath. This isn't pity, and you don't owe me anything. She stopped, her composure cracking for just a moment. The mask slipped, and Marcus saw the woman beneath it, the one who had lost a child and spent 5 years on wondering if she could have prevented it. I know what it's like to worry about a child's health. I know what it's like to wonder if you're missing something important. There was no pretense in her voice, no performance of generosity for the cameras that were surely still watching from a distance. There was only the raw honesty of someone who had lived through her own nightmare and didn't want to see another parent suffer the same fate. Marcus made his decision. Okay, thank you. Relief flickered across Victoria's features so quickly he almost missed it. She nodded once, then led them through a series of corridors that Marcus had never known existed. They passed security checkpoints that opened at a word from her assistant, moved through areas marked staff only and authorized personnel, until they reached a discreet door marked with a simple medical cross. Inside was a space that looked more like a boutique hotel than a clinic. Soft lighting, comfortable seating, art on the walls that probably cost more than Marcus's annual salary. A doctor appeared within minutes. A kind-faced woman in her 40s who introduced herself as Dr. Sarah Chen. She examined Emma with gentle efficiency while Marcus stood nearby, his anxiety mounting with each passing second. Victoria remained in the room but at a respectful distance, as if understanding that this was his moment with his daughter, not hers. When Dr. Chen finished her examination, she turned to Marcus with an expression that was carefully neutral. There are some signs of respiratory sensitivity, nothing immediately dangerous, but worth monitoring. I would recommend a follow-up with a pediatric pulmonologist within the next week. Marcus nodded, already calculating the cost of such a visit in his head. The time off work he would need to request, the insurance paperwork that would inevitably follow, the co-pay that would stretch his budget even thinner. It was a familiar arithmetic, one he performed constantly as a single parent with limited resources. Victoria stepped forward, her voice taking on that decisive quality he had heard earlier. Dr. Chen, could you provide me with the details? I'd like to ensure the follow-up appointment been arranged. Marcus opened his mouth to protest, but Victoria's hand on his arm stopped him. When she spoke, her voice was low enough that only he could hear. Please let me do this, not for you, for her. There was something in her eyes that Marcus hadn't seen before, a desperation that went beyond simple kindness. He realized with sudden clarity that this was not about him at all. Victoria was not trying to save a struggling single father. She was trying to save herself, to find some purpose in the tragedy she carried, to transform her loss into something meaningful. He thought of Jennifer, of the way she had looked at Emma in those final moments, her eyes full of love and fear and hope. He thought of all the things she would never get to do for their daughter, all the moments she would miss. And he understood in a way he couldn't articulate that accepting help was not weakness. It was honoring the connections that life placed in your path, the unexpected grace that appeared when you needed it most. Okay, thank you. Victoria's shoulders relaxed almost imperceptibly. She nodded to Dr. Chen, exchanged a few words with her assistant, and within minutes everything was arranged. The follow-up appointment, the specialist referral, a car to take Marcus and Emma to his cousin's apartment in Queens. As they walked toward the exit, Marcus noticed the way Victoria looked at Emma, the way her hand almost reached out to touch the baby's cheek before pulling back at the last moment. There was a hunger in that gesture, a longing that spoke of empty arms and silent nurseries, and grief that never fully healed. Victoria, she turned to him with something like surprise, as if she hadn't expected to hear her name spoken so simply. Why are you doing this? Really? She was quiet for a long moment. The sounds of the terminal faded around them, and for a few seconds they existed in their own private world, two strangers bound by circumstances neither had chosen. Because I couldn't save my own child. And every day since then, I've been looking for a way to make that loss mean something. She paused, her voice catching slightly. Your daughter gave me a purpose tonight, even if just for a few hours. I'm the one who should be thanking you. Marcus didn't know what to say. He stood there, Emma in his arms, watching this powerful woman reveal her most painful truth with a courage that took his breath away. The cameras were gone now, the photographers long since dispersed to chase other stories. There was no audience for this moment, no one to perform for or impress. There was only honesty, raw and unfiltered, passing between two people who had both lost the ones they loved. The car Victoria had arranged was waiting at the curb, a sleek black sedan with tinted windows that screamed money without saying a word. Marcus buckled Emma into the car seat that had somehow materialized, arranged the blanket around her small body, and turned to thank Victoria one last time. But she was not looking at him. She was looking at Emma, at the way the baby's fingers curled around a fold of her blanket, at the peaceful expression on her sleeping face. And in that moment, Marcus saw something he had not expected to see on the face of a woman who controlled $1 billion empire. He saw vulnerability. I should go, Victoria said, though she made no move to leave. The board meeting, the quarterly reports, the endless parade of obligations. Marcus nodded. Thank you for everything. Victoria finally looked at him, her eyes bright with emotions she was clearly struggling to contain. Take care of her. She's lucky to have you. Then she turned and walked back toward the terminal, her assistant falling into step beside her, already listing the appointments and calls that awaited. Marcus watched her go until she disappeared through the automatic doors, then climbed into the car beside his daughter. The driver pulled away from the curb, merging into the river of taillights that flowed toward the city. Emma slept on, oblivious to the extraordinary night she had just experienced. Marcus leaned his head against the window and watched the Manhattan skyline grow larger in the distance, its towers lit up like candles against the darkness. He still had the business card in his pocket. He could feel its edges pressing against his thigh, a tangible reminder that tonight had actually happened. Victoria Sterling, the Ice Queen, the woman who had held his crying baby and spoken of her own lost child with a grief that matched his own. He did not know if he would ever call that number, did not know if tonight was the beginning of something or simply a brief intersection of two lives that would never cross again. But he knew with a certainty that surprised him that he would never forget the way she had looked at Emma, the hunger, the love, the desperate hope that maybe somehow the universe still had kindness left to offer. The city lights blurred past the window, and Marcus closed his eyes. Tomorrow there would be the specialist appointment to think about, the medical bills, the endless logistics of single parenthood. But for now, in this quiet car with his sleeping daughter, he allowed himself to simply exist in the space between what was and what might be. The medical suite appeared within minutes of Victoria's call, a pristine space tucked behind unmarked doors that most travelers would never know existed. Dr. Sarah Chen moved with quiet competence, her hands gentle as she positioned Emma on the examination table. The baby fussed but didn't cry, perhaps sensing this was different from the chaos of the flight. Marcus stood close enough to intervene if needed, far enough to let the doctor work. Victoria had retreated to a chair near the window, present but deliberately unobtrusive. The morning sun was just beginning to break over the city, casting long shadows through the blinds. Doctor Chen placed a small device on Emma's finger, a pulse oximeter, she explained, measuring oxygen levels in the blood. She listened to Emma's chest with a stethoscope, asked questions about family history that Marcus answered as best he could. Jennifer's side of the family tree was mostly blank now that she was gone. Her parents dead before Emma was born, her only sister living somewhere in Oregon and not returning calls. The examination took 12 minutes. When Dr. Chen straightened and turned to face him, her expression carried neither alarm nor dismissal, just careful professionalism. Your daughter has mild exercise-induced asthma, likely triggered by altitude changes and the dry cabin air. It's not dangerous if managed properly, but it does require monitoring. Marcus's throat tightened. Another thing to manage. Another potential crisis lurking in Emma's small body, waiting to ambush him when he least expected it. Chen continued, pulling up information on a tablet. She'll need a daily preventive inhaler and a rescue inhaler for emergencies. I'd also recommend a humidifier in her room at night, especially in Denver's climate, and a follow-up with a pediatric pulmonologist within 2 weeks. Marcus nodded, his mind already doing the arithmetic he'd become expert at performing. The inhalers would run about $340 a month based on what he'd seen other parents discussing in online forums. The humidifier, if he bought a decent one, maybe $450. The specialist visit, with his high deductible insurance, would cost him the full amount until he hit $3,000 in annual out-of-pocket expenses. He'd paid $800 so far this year. Dr. Chen was still talking, explaining dosages and warning signs, but Marcus found himself calculating. Instead, $200 to $250 a month ongoing, plus the initial setup costs, plus the specialist appointments. He could pick up an extra shift on Saturdays. Maybe see if the distribution center needed overnight supervisors. Those paid $1 more per hour. He'd already stopped buying coffee on his morning break, started bringing leftovers for lunch, let his cell phone plan downgrade to the cheapest tier. Do you have questions? Dr. Chen's voice pulled him back. Yeah, what's the payment structure for the visit today? And can I get a referral to someone who takes payment plans for the follow-up? Dr. Chen glanced toward Victoria, then back at Marcus. Something unspoken passed between them before she nodded. We can discuss that at the desk. Victoria stood as Dr. Chen stepped out. Marcus turned to face her, and she spoke before he could. Let me handle the costs. The words came out firm, decisive, the voice of someone accustomed to solving problems with money. Marcus felt his spine straighten, an instinctive response to charity he'd been fighting his whole life. I appreciate the offer, but I can handle this. Marcus, you're working 50-hour weeks. Missing shifts means missing rent money. I've been handling things for 11 months. I'll figure it out. Victoria's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. They stood facing each other across the small space, the air between them charged with competing needs neither wanted to name. Victoria needed to help, needed it with a desperation that went beyond generosity into something more primal. Marcus needed to maintain the dignity that was sometimes the only thing keeping him afloat. You don't have to do this alone. Yes, I do. That's what being a father means. Victoria was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke again, her voice had lost its edge. What if Sterling Technologies hired you? Remote work, better insurance coverage, your skills in logistics management. Marcus almost laughed, the sound bitter in his throat. I run a forklift and manage inventory counts. I don't code or analyze data or whatever it is tech companies need. We have distribution centers, 3 in Colorado alone. I need operations managers who understand ground-level efficiency, not just spreadsheets. The offer hung between them, and Marcus realized with sudden clarity that Victoria was trying to give him something harder to refuse than money. Not charity, but opportunity. Not rescue, but employment. The distinction mattered more than he could articulate. I'd need to see the job posting. Apply like anyone else. Of course. Victoria pulled out her phone, typed something, and within seconds, Marcus's phone buzzed with an email. The subject line read, Sterling Technologies, Operations Director, Denver Facility. The salary listing made his breath catch. 72,000 base, full health benefits, 3 weeks paid time off. Think about it, Victoria said, her voice softer now. The position is real. You'd have to interview with the hiring manager. Prove yourself like any candidate. I won't influence the decision. Marcus looked at her, trying to read what lay beneath the offer. Was this still charity, just dressed up in professional language? Or was she genuinely giving him a chance to earn his way into stability? He wanted to believe the latter, needed to believe it, because the alternative meant accepting that he was just another project for a billionaire's guilty conscience. I'll think about it. They walked out together, Emma drowsy in Marcus's arms. The terminal had filled with morning travelers, business people pulling roller bags and checking phones, families herding children toward gates. Outside the clinic, Ray was waiting, tall and broad-shouldered, his Marine Corps tattoo visible beneath his rolled-up sleeve. Bro, you good? Took longer than I thought. Marcus made introductions. Ray's eyebrows rose when he heard Victoria's name, recognition flickering across his face. But he was smart enough not to comment. Victoria's town car idled at the curb, a Mercedes S-Class that probably cost more than Ray's annual salary as a mechanic. Marcus's borrowed car seat was still in Ray's beat-up Honda Civic. The contrast couldn't have been sharper. Two worlds colliding in a moment that felt both surreal and oddly inevitable. Victoria reached into her bag, produced a business card identical to the one she'd given him earlier. She pressed it into his palm, her fingers cool against his skin. For Emma, if you need anything, medical advice, questions about the treatment, anything at all. Her assistant appeared at her elbow, speaking urgently about schedules. But Victoria held Marcus's gaze for another moment, something vulnerable flickering behind her carefully maintained composure. Marcus found the words without planning them. Thank you for seeing me as a person, not just a problem to solve. Victoria blinked, and for a moment he thought she might cry. Instead, she nodded once, sharp and controlled. You're not a problem, Marcus. You're someone who reminded me that I'm still human. Then Emma reached for Victoria, her small hand opening and closing in that universal gesture of infant wanting. Victoria's mask cracked completely. She leaned in and pressed her lips to Emma's forehead, whispering something Marcus couldn't hear. When she straightened, her eyes were bright with unshed tears. She walked to her car without looking back. Marcus watched the Mercedes pull away, disappearing into the morning traffic, and felt like he'd just lost something he'd never actually possessed. Ray whistled low. Man, that's Victoria Sterling. The Victoria Sterling. I know. You know she's worth like $2 billion? I know, Ray. And she just kissed your baby and gave you her personal number? Marcus climbed into the Civic, buckling Emma into her car seat. Ray slid behind the wheel, still processing what he'd witnessed. It's not like that. She just helped with Emma on the flight. Ray pulled into traffic, navigating toward the Queensboro Bridge. She looked at you like it was more than help, bro. Trust me on that. Marcus didn't respond. He watched the city slide past the window. Steel and glass towers that belonged to people like Victoria, a universe so far removed from his own, it might as well be another planet. He had the business card in his pocket and an email about a job that could change everything. But he also had bills due in 3 days and a daughter who now needed expensive medication every month. The apartment Ray shared with 2 other mechanics in Queens was cramped but clean. Marcus set up Emma's portable crib in the corner of the living room while Ray made coffee. The TV was on, tuned to the morning news, and Marcus froze when he saw the image on screen. It was Victoria holding Emma at the medical clinic. The photo was slightly blurry, taken through a window, probably by someone with a telephoto lens. The headline scrolling beneath read, Sterling Tech CEO's Mystery Man and Baby, Secret Romance? Ray turned up the volume. A perfectly coiffed anchor was speaking. Victoria Sterling, the notoriously private CEO of Sterling Technologies, was spotted early this morning at JFK Airport with an unidentified man and infant. Sources say the trio spent nearly an hour in a private medical facility before departing separately. This marks the first time Sterling has been photographed with a potential romantic partner since her divorce 5 years ago. The screen switched to a panel of talking heads, entertainment reporters dissecting the image with the same gravity others might apply to geopolitical crises. The body language is unmistakable. Look at how she's holding that baby. That's maternal instinct. But who is the man? He's clearly not from her usual social circle. The clothing, the general appearance, this could be a Cinderella story in reverse. Or it's PR. Sterling's been trying to soften her Ice Queen image for years. What better way than staging photos with a baby? Marcus felt his face grow hot. Ray muted the television, his expression caught between amusement and concern. Bro, I didn't ask for this. I know, but it's happening anyway. Marcus's phone started buzzing. Text messages from coworkers at the distribution center, people he barely spoke to suddenly demanding to know if that was him on the news. A call from his supervisor, he let it go to voicemail. Another call from a number he didn't recognize. Probably a reporter who'd somehow gotten his information. Emma started crying, overwhelmed by the unfamiliar environment. Marcus picked her up, bouncing her gently while his phone continued its relentless buzzing. This was his life now, apparently. A media spectacle he'd never wanted, attached to a woman he'd known for less than 12 hours. All because his daughter wouldn't stop crying on an airplane. 3 days later, a package arrived. Ray brought it up from the building's front entrance. A large cardboard box with Sterling Technologies printed discreetly in one corner. Marcus stared at it like it might contain something dangerous. You gonna open it or just look at it all day? Marcus cut through the packing tape. Inside was a medical-grade nebulizer still in its original box, retail value stamped at $599. Beneath it, a year's supply of preventive inhalers still sealed in pharmaceutical packaging. A folder containing detailed information about Dr. James Morrison, pediatric pulmonologist in Denver, with an appointment confirmation for the following Tuesday at 2 p.m. A letter from an insurance company explaining that Emma's treatment had been pre-authorized for full coverage under the Sterling Technologies Employee Health Initiative, and a note, handwritten on cream-colored stationery in elegant script. For Emma, because she deserves every chance. This isn't charity. This is what any parent would do if they could. Please don't refuse. V. Marcus sat on Ray's couch holding the note, feeling the weight of what it represented. $1,000 in medical equipment, specialist appointments arranged and paid for, a year of medication that would have eaten his budget alive, all delivered with a few words that simultaneously acknowledged his pride and asked him to set it aside. Ray picked up one of the inhaler boxes, examining it. She sent you over $1,000 in medical supplies and covered the specialist visits. I didn't ask for any of this. But Emma needs it. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. Because they were true. Pride doesn't keep Emma healthy. The thought crystallized with painful clarity. He could refuse Victoria's help and feel righteous about his independence while his daughter struggled to breathe. Or he could accept what was being offered and give Emma the care she needed. Ray seemed to read his thoughts. Look, man, I get it. You don't want to be some charity case. But that baby, he gestured toward Emma sleeping in her portable crib. She didn't ask to be born into this situation. You want to be too proud to accept help? Fine. But don't let your pride hurt her. Marcus looked at his daughter, at the peaceful rise and fall of her chest, and felt something shift inside him. Maybe accepting help wasn't weakness. Maybe it was another form of strength, the kind that required swallowing your ego and admitting you couldn't do everything alone. That night, he pulled out his phone and typed a message to the number on Victoria's business card. Victoria, package arrived. I don't know what to say except thank you. I'll pay you back. The response came within 3 minutes. No repayment necessary. How is Emma feeling? They texted for 2 hours. Marcus told her about setting up the nebulizer, how Emma had initially fought the mask but eventually settled. Victoria asked detailed questions about dosages and breathing patterns, the kind of specific medical queries that reveal genuine concern rather than polite interest. The conversation drifted into other territory. Marcus admitted how strange it felt staying in Ray's apartment, sleeping on a couch while Emma occupied the only quiet corner. Victoria confessed that her penthouse felt empty, 4,000 square feet designed for a family she no longer had, rooms that echoed with silence. Marcus typed, "My cousin's couch feels crowded. Want to trade?" He regretted it immediately, worried the joke was too familiar. But Victoria's response came back. "I think Emma would redecorate my minimalist aesthetic with Cheerios and strained carrots." They were flirting. The realization hit Marcus with surprise and something else, a flutter of possibility he hadn't felt since Jennifer died. This woman who controlled boardrooms and commanded billions was texting him at 11 p.m. about baby food and furniture. Victoria's next message appeared. "Marcus, I meant what I said about the job offer. Sterling Denver needs an operations director. 72K base salary, full health benefits including dental and vision, remote flexibility for parent schedules. The application link is below." Marcus clicked through. The job posting was real, listed on Sterling Technologies' official career page. The requirements matched his experience almost exactly: logistics management, inventory control, team supervision. It wasn't charity disguised as employment. It was an actual position he was qualified for. But would he have seen this posting without Victoria? Would his resume have made it past the initial screening if a billionaire CEO hadn't personally flagged his name? He typed, "I'll apply through the official channels. If I get it, I need to know I earned it." Victoria's response, "You will. I've already told HR I won't be involved in the hiring decision. Your resume stands on its own." Marcus wanted to believe her, needed to believe that he could earn his way into stability rather than having it handed to him. He spent an hour updating his resume, detailing the efficiency improvements he'd implemented at his current warehouse, the cost savings from his revised inventory system. At 1 a.m., he submitted the application and tried not to hope too hard. The media storm didn't subside. If anything, it intensified. By the end of the first week, Marcus's face was appearing in tabloids and gossip sites across the internet. Someone had identified him, probably by cross-referencing flight manifests and property records until they found a match. His full name, his address in Denver, his job at the distribution center. Everything laid bare for public consumption. Mystery man revealed. Meet Marcus Hayes, the working-class father who captured the Ice Queen's heart. From warehouse to penthouse? Inside Victoria Sterling's surprising new romance. Class warfare and love. Can a billionaire and a single dad make it work? His co-workers treated him differently now. Some were congratulatory in that aggressive way men had of masking curiosity as celebration. Others were resentful, making pointed comments about people who got ahead by knowing the right person. His supervisor calls him into the office. "Hayes, I need to know if you're planning to leave. Because if you are, I need time to find a replacement." Marcus had been at the distribution center for 8 years, worked his way up from loading docks to forklift operator to supervisor. He'd never called in sick without cause, never complained about the mandatory overtime, never caused drama. But one photograph with Victoria Sterling and suddenly his loyalty was in question. "I'm here until I'm not, sir. Same as always." The supervisor grunted, unconvinced. Marcus went back to work, feeling the weight of stares from every direction. At lunch, he Googled his own name out of morbid curiosity. 847,000 results. Reddit threads dissecting his relationship with Victoria, analyzing every pixel of the airport photos. Think pieces about class differences in modern romance. Speculation about whether Emma was actually his daughter or Victoria's or theirs together. Wild theories that would have been funny if they weren't so invasive. He turned off his phone and tried to forget that the internet existed. Meanwhile, 3,000 miles away in San Francisco, Victoria was fighting her own battles. The Sterling Technologies boardroom occupied the top floor of the company's downtown headquarters, floor-to-ceiling windows offering views of the bay. 14 people sat around the conference table, board members representing billions in shareholder value, each one accustomed to being the smartest person in any room they entered. Victoria stood at the head of the table, presenting Q3 earnings results that exceeded projections by 18%. Revenue up, margins improved, market share expanding in three key sectors. By any objective measure, Sterling Technologies was performing exceptionally under her leadership. But the questions that followed had nothing to do with quarterly performance. Victoria, we need to discuss the photographs. The speaker was Richard Ashford, the board's chairman, old money from Boston, a man who'd been skeptical of Victoria's appointment as CEO from the beginning. He steepled his fingers with the careful precision of someone about to deliver a killing blow disguised as concern. The images circulating in media outlets show you in what appears to be an intimate situation with an unidentified man and infant. Are concerned at how this affects Sterling's brand perception. Victoria's voice came out colder than the room's climate-controlled air. My personal life has no bearing on company performance, as the numbers clearly demonstrate. Another board member spoke up, Margaret Chen, a venture capitalist who usually supported Victoria's decisions. The optics matter. Investors are questioning whether you're distracted. We need focus heading into Q4. I delivered Q3 results that beat projections by 18%. I've increased shareholder value by 42% since taking this position. If that's distraction, perhaps I should be distracted more often. Richard leaned forward, his voice taking on a paternalistic tone that made Victoria's jaw clench. No one questions your professional competence. But the narrative being constructed, single mother subplot, working class boyfriend, it suggests instability, a midlife crisis perhaps. The words detonated in Victoria's chest. She felt her carefully maintained composure crack, felt the rage she usually kept locked away rise toward the surface. He's not my boyfriend, and my personal choices are not subject to board approval. When those choices affect stock price, they absolutely are our concern. Victoria's hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against the table, willing herself back to control. These men, because they were mostly men, had questioned her every move since she'd taken this position. Too young, too female, too willing to take risks they didn't understand. And now too human, apparently. Too willing to show that beneath the CEO title was a woman who'd lost a child and found an unexpected connection with a stranger on an airplane. She forced her voice level. This meeting is adjourned. If you have concerns about my leadership, call a vote. Otherwise, I have work to do. She left before anyone could respond, her heels clicking against marble floors as she strode toward her office. Her assistant fell into step beside her, listing appointments and conference calls that demanded immediate attention. Victoria barely heard her. In her office alone, she let herself feel the full weight of the morning. The board's implicit threat, the media circus that showed no signs of stopping, the impossible position of being expected to be superhuman, brilliant in business but sterile in personal life, powerful but not too powerful, successful but still somehow available for male approval. Her phone sat on the desk, Marcus's last message still visible on the screen. He'd sent a photo the night before. Emma playing with building blocks on Ray's living room floor, her face scrunched in concentration. The text beneath, she's obsessed with knocking things down. Future demolition expert? Victoria had stared at that photo for 10 minutes, memorizing every detail. Emma's hair caught in morning light, the tiny furrow between her eyebrows. The way her fingers gripped the wooden blocks with that particular intensity babies brought to everything. She picked up her phone and typed, I'm sorry about the media attention. I can release a statement clarifying we're just friends. Marcus's response appeared almost immediately. Are we? Just friends? Victoria stared at the question for a full minute. Her thumb hovered over the keyboard, words forming and dissolving without being typed. What were they? She'd known him for less than a week. They'd spent a few hours together on an airplane and in an airport clinic. Everything else had been text messages and phone calls, conversations that stretched late into the night, sharing details about their lives that Victoria hadn't told anyone in years. Finally, she typed, I don't know what we are, but I know I think about you and Emma constantly. The admission felt dangerous, like stepping off solid ground into something uncertain, but also liberating, like shedding armor she'd worn so long it had fused to her skin. Marcus's response, then maybe we should figure it out, together. 2 days later, Marcus received a call from Sterling Technologies' Denver office. The hiring manager sounded professional but warm, asking if he could come in for an interview the following week. Marcus agreed, his heart pounding with a mixture of hope and terror. The interview lasted 90 minutes. They asked detailed questions about his experience, specific scenarios from his current job, how he'd handled inventory discrepancies, what systems he had implemented to improve efficiency. Marcus answered honestly, drawing on 8 years of hands-on knowledge. He didn't mention Victoria. The interviewers didn't bring her up. 3 days later, he got the offer. $72,000 annual salary, full health coverage including dental and vision, Emma listed as a dependent at no additional cost. 3 weeks paid vacation, a signing bonus of $5,000 to help with relocation expenses. Marcus read the email 4 times before it felt real. This was more than double his current salary. This was stability, the kind that meant Emma could see doctors without him calculating the costs first. The kind that meant he could afford a 2-bedroom apartment where Emma had her own room instead of a corner of someone else's living space. He called Victoria before accepting, needing to know the truth. "Did you influence this decision?" Her voice was firm. "I kept my word. I didn't speak to anyone in Denver HR. They made their choice based on your qualifications." "How do I know that?" "Because I'm telling you the truth. And because you need to believe you earned this, Marcus. You did. Your resume was strong. Your interview was excellent. You got this job because you deserved it." Marcus wanted to believe her, chose to believe her, because the alternative was refusing an opportunity that could change everything for Emma. "I'm accepting the offer." Victoria's relief was audible even through the phone. "I'm glad, really glad." They fell into a rhythm after that. Weekly check-ins that gradually became daily conversations. Marcus sent updates about Emma's progress with the medication. Her breathing improved, sleep became more regular. Victoria asked questions that revealed genuine medical knowledge, probably gained through desperate research after losing Daniel. In week 4, Emma slept through the night for the first time in months. Marcus sent Victoria a message at 6 a.m. "She did it 11 straight hours." Victoria's response, "That's wonderful. How do you feel?" Marcus laughed, typing, "Like I forgot what being rested feels like. It's weird not being exhausted constantly." Emma must notice the difference. Babies pick up on parental stress. It was true. Emma seemed happier, more playful. She'd started pulling herself up on furniture, not quite walking, but clearly preparing for it. Marcus watched his daughter explore Ray's apartment with fearless curiosity and felt something shift in his chest, a loosening of the constant anxiety that had defined the past year. In week 6, Victoria asked if they could video call. Marcus agreed, suddenly nervous in a way that felt absurd. They'd been talking for weeks, sharing intimate details about their losses and fears. But seeing her face on screen felt different, more immediate. When the call connected, Victoria was in her office. He could see the San Francisco skyline through windows behind her. She'd changed out of whatever formal business attire she'd worn earlier into a simple black sweater. Her hair was down, falling past her shoulders. She looked younger somehow, less severe. "Hi." Marcus shifted his phone so she could see Emma playing on a blanket spread across Ray's floor. "Say hi to Victoria, Em." Emma looked up at the screen, her face breaking into a smile. She babbled something enthusiastic and reached for the phone. Victoria laughed, a sound so genuine and unexpected that Marcus found himself smiling too. "She's grown so much." They talked for 45 minutes. Emma performed for the camera, showing off her new trick of stacking blocks. Victoria asked about Marcus's start date at Sterling, Denver, 2 weeks away. He asked about her latest board meeting, and she made a dismissive gesture. "Same nonsense. They're convinced I'm having some sort of crisis because I showed basic human emotion for once." "Are you having a crisis?" Victoria was quiet, choosing her words carefully. "I'm having something. I'm not sure crisis is the right word." "What would you call it?" She met his eyes through the screen. "A chance, maybe a second chance if I'm lucky." The words hung between them, weighted with possibility. Emma chose that moment to tumble backward, startled by her own lack of balance. She didn't cry, just looked confused. Both adults laughed, the tension broken. Before they disconnected, Victoria's voice went soft. "Marcus, when are you planning to come to Denver?" "I'm flying back next week to find an apartment before the job starts." I could be there if you want, if it wouldn't be too forward. Marcus's pulse quickened. I want that. I've wanted it for weeks. Victoria's smile transformed her entire face. Then I'll book a flight. She arrived on a Thursday morning, flying commercial instead of the private jet she normally used. Marcus picked her up at Denver International in Ray's borrowed truck. He'd traded his car for the plane tickets and still hadn't saved enough for a replacement. Victoria climbed into the passenger seat wearing jeans and a cashmere sweater, looking more approachable than he'd ever seen her. Emma was strapped in her car seat, kicking her feet with excitement. The moment Victoria turned to look at her, Emma squealed and reached out both hands. Victoria's eyes filled with tears. She remembers me. Marcus's throat tightened. We both do. The drive into Denver felt simultaneously too long and not long enough. They talked about everything and nothing. Victoria's flight, Marcus's apartment search, Emma's new obsession with ceiling fans. But underneath the surface, conversation ran currents of deeper things neither quite knew how to voice. Marcus took her to Rosie's Diner, a place he'd been eating breakfast since he moved to Denver a decade ago. The vinyl booths were cracked, the coffee was strong, and the waitress knew everyone's order before they sat down. Doris appeared with menus in a practiced smile that widened when she saw Marcus. Haven't seen you in a while, honey. And who's this? This is Victoria. Victoria, Doris basically runs Denver. Doris laughed, but her eyes were sharp as she assessed Victoria, taking in the expensive sweater, the designer watch, the general polish that marked her as not from around here. But then Emma babbled from her high chair, and Doris's expression softened. That baby gets prettier every time I see her. What can I get you folks? Victoria ordered the meatloaf special without looking at the menu, coffee black. Doris raised an eyebrow but nodded approvingly. After she left, Victoria leaned back in the booth, something in her posture relaxing. Nobody here recognizes me. Should they? In San Francisco, I can't walk 2 blocks without photographers or people wanting to discuss business. Here, I'm just someone eating meatloaf. Marcus understood what she wasn't saying, that anonymity was a gift, that being treated like a normal person felt like freedom. Their food arrived. They ate in comfortable silence, broken occasionally by Emma's demands for attention or Doris refilling coffee. Other diners came and went, paying them no special attention. Just another couple having lunch with a baby. Except they weren't a couple. Not really. They were 2 people who'd met under extraordinary circumstances, who'd been sharing late-night conversations for weeks, who were now sitting across from each other trying to figure out what came next. Victoria put down her fork. Marcus, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. Okay. Am I here because you miss Emma, or because you miss us, you and me? The question landed like a stone in still water, sending ripples in every direction. Marcus set his own fork down, meeting her gaze directly. Both. I missed Emma desperately. Watching her on video calls isn't the same as seeing her in person. But I missed you too. The way you listen without trying to fix everything. The way you don't treat me like I'm broken just because my wife died. The way you understand grief without needing it, explained. Victoria's eyes were bright. I'm terrified of this, Marcus. You're from a different world than mine. What happens when I go back to San Francisco and you're here with Emma and your new job? What happens when the board finds out we're actually together and not just friends? What happens when you're a billionaire and I'm a warehouse guy making $72,000 a year? She flinched at his bluntness. That's not what I meant. Isn't it? Victoria, I'm terrified too. I'm terrified that you're going to realize I can't give you the life you're used to. That Emma and I are just some project to make you feel better about losing Daniel. That one day you'll wake up and wonder what you were thinking, slumming it with a guy who shops at Walmart and drives a 12-year-old truck. Victoria reached across the table, taking his hand. Her fingers were cool and steady. You're not a project. Emma isn't a replacement for Daniel. And I don't care about money. I have more than I could spend in 3 lifetimes. What I don't have is someone who sees me as human instead of a title. Someone who makes me laugh at 11 p.m. when I should be reviewing quarterly reports. Someone who... She stopped, seemed to gather courage. Someone who makes me want to try again. to risk feeling something besides emptiness. Emma threw a Cheerio, breaking the moment. They both laughed, the tension dissipating. But Marcus kept holding Victoria's hand, and she didn't pull away. After lunch, he took her to the apartment he'd found. A two-bedroom in Aurora, nothing fancy but clean and affordable. Jennifer's photos still sat on a box waiting to be unpacked, and Marcus watched Victoria notice them without comment. She picked up Emma, walking through the empty rooms while Marcus explained his plans for furniture he couldn't afford yet. In Emma's future bedroom, Victoria stood at the window looking out at the parking lot and sparse trees beyond. Emma rested against her shoulder, content and drowsy. Marcus watched from the doorway, struck by how natural they looked together. "I haven't done this since Daniel," Victoria said without turning around. Marcus stepped into the room. "Done what?" "Held a baby, imagined a nursery, let myself want something I'm afraid to lose." She turned to face him, and Marcus saw the woman beneath the CEO armor, vulnerable and scared and hoping anyway. "I'm afraid to love Emma and lose her too." Marcus closed the distance between them. "I'm afraid to love you and have you realize I'm not enough." They stood there, Emma between them, admitting their fears in an empty room that smelled like fresh paint and possibility. Then Marcus took Victoria's free hand, threading his fingers through hers. "We're both terrified. Maybe that means we're doing something real." That evening, Marcus suggested walking to Washington Park. Emma had been cooped up all day, and the autumn air carried that particular Colorado crispness that made sitting indoors feel like a crime. Victoria agreed immediately, something in her expression suggesting she needed the movement as much as Emma did. They walked through Aurora's residential streets, Emma in her stroller watching the world pass with wide-eyed fascination. The houses here were modest, single-story ranches with chain-link fences, cars from the previous decade parked in driveways, yards maintained but not manicured. This was working-class Denver, where people mowed their own lawns and fixed their own cars and didn't have the luxury of landscaping services. Victoria didn't seem to notice the difference between this neighborhood and whatever pristine enclave her San Francisco penthouse occupied. She pushed the stroller while Marcus walked beside her, their shoulders occasionally brushing as they navigated the cracked sidewalk. They talked about small things, Emma's latest babbles that sounded almost like words, the weather shift toward winter, whether Marcus should buy or lease furniture for the new apartment. The park appeared ahead, a stretch of green bordered by mature cottonwoods, shedding their leaves in golden drifts. A few other families occupied the playground equipment, parents watching toddlers navigate slides, older kids playing pickup soccer on the grass. Normal people living normal lives, unaware that one of America's wealthiest women was walking among them. Marcus was pointing out the best section of playground for Emma's age when the car appeared. It happened fast. A sedan pulling up to the curb 30 feet ahead, driver's side door opening before the vehicle fully stopped. A man emerged with professional camera equipment already raised, telephoto lens, rapid-fire shutter clicks that sounded like aggressive applause. Marcus's body reacted before his mind caught up. He stepped between the camera and Emma's stroller, his hand instinctively reaching to shield his daughter from view. The photographer moved closer, still shooting. "Miss Sterling, can you confirm this is your new family?" Victoria's posture shifted. Marcus felt it more than saw it. The relaxed woman who'd been pushing a stroller transformed into something harder, more guarded. Her CEO armor sliding back into place. But before she could speak, another photographer appeared from a parked van, then a third from around the corner. They'd been waiting, Marcus realized. Someone had tipped them off about Victoria being in Denver, probably tracked her flight, followed them from the diner. Emma started crying, startled by the sudden chaos. The flashes intensified, photographers jostling for position. One of them got too close, within arm's reach of the stroller, and Marcus's control snapped. "Get away from my daughter!" His voice came out louder than intended, carrying the kind of edge that made the nearest photographer take an involuntary step back. But the cameras kept clicking, capturing every moment of this confrontation for tomorrow's headlines. Victoria stood frozen beside him, caught between two versions of herself. Marcus could see the calculation happening behind her eyes, PR training, telling her to create distance, deny involvement, protect the carefully constructed narrative that kept shareholders happy. But something else fought against that instinct, something newer and more fragile. The lead photographer pushed forward. Ms. Sterling, sources say you've been involved with Mr. Hayes for several weeks. Can you comment on the relationship? What about the class difference? Are you two living together? Marcus saw Victoria's jaw tighten, saw her hands curl into fists at her sides. She was going to shut this down, he realized. Going to deploy whatever corporate speak would minimize the damage and get these vultures to leave. He braced himself for the careful denial, the professional distance that would reduce their connection to nothing more than a brief encounter on an airplane. Instead, Victoria stepped forward. She took Marcus's hand, deliberately, visibly, making sure every camera caught the gesture. Her voice came out clear and cold as winter steel. Yes, we're together. This is Marcus Hayes and his daughter Emma, and my personal life is not your business. The photographers erupted with questions, but Victoria wasn't finished. She squeezed Marcus's hand tighter, her composure absolute, even as she publicly claimed something that would send shockwaves through her carefully managed world. Your shareholders care about quarterly earnings, which exceeded projections by 18% last quarter. My relationship status doesn't affect market performance. Now leave us alone. She turned, still holding Marcus's hand, and walked back the way they'd come. Marcus grabbed the stroller with his free hand and followed, his heart hammering against his ribs. The photographers trailed behind for half a block before giving up, already composing headlines on their phones. They walked in silence until they reached Marcus's building. Only when they were inside his apartment, door locked behind them, did Victoria release his hand. Emma had stopped crying but remained fussy, picking up on the adult's tension. Marcus set Emma on her playmat, giving her favorite stuffed elephant to clutch. Then he turned to face Victoria, feeling anger rise in his throat like bile. You can't just declare we're together without asking me first. Victoria's head snapped toward him, surprise flickering across her features. I was protecting Emma from the cameras. No, you were controlling the narrative. That's what CEOs do, right? Manage the story, spin the message, make sure everything fits the approved version. The words came out harsher than he'd intended, but Marcus couldn't stop them. Weeks of anxiety, of wondering whether he was just another business decision in Victoria's portfolio of charitable acts, came pouring out. I can't be your project, Victoria. I can't be the poor single dad you rescue to feel better about losing Daniel. She recoiled as if he'd struck her. That's not what this is, isn't it? The job, the medical care, flying to Denver. You're trying to fix my life because you couldn't fix his. Victoria's eyes filled with tears, but her voice stayed steady. Maybe I am. Maybe that's part of it, but it's not all of it. I care about Emma, and I care about you. I haven't cared about anyone in 5 years. Marcus paced the small living room, his frustration mixing with guilt for attacking her when she'd just publicly defended their relationship. I care about you too, but I need to know this is real. Not guilt, not obligation, not filling a void because you're too afraid to face the empty space Daniel left behind. What if it's all of those things? Victoria's composure finally cracked, tears spilling down her cheeks. What if I'm complicated and messy and still grieving? Does that mean I can't also genuinely want this? The question hung between them, raw and honest in a way that stripped away all pretense. Emma chose that moment to crawl over to Victoria, pulling herself up on Victoria's leg and babbling urgently. Both adults looked down at the baby, and something about her oblivious innocence diffused the charged atmosphere. Marcus sank onto the couch, suddenly exhausted. We're both broken people trying to figure out if we can build something real from the pieces. Victoria picked up Emma, settling beside Marcus with the baby in her lap. Maybe that's exactly what makes it possible. We both know what loss feels like. We both understand that love doesn't erase the people we've lost. It just adds to them. They sat in silence while Emma played with Victoria's necklace, her small fingers fascinated by the simple pendant. Marcus realized they'd just had their first real fight and come through it without destroying the fragile thing growing between them. He reached for Victoria's free hand. Tell me about Daniel. Everything. Not the careful version you give interviews. The real story. Victoria drew a shaky breath, then began. She told him about meeting Robert at a tech conference when she was 29, about their whirlwind courtship and marriage within 6 months, about becoming CEO at 32 and pregnant at 33, believing she could have it all, the career, the family, the perfect life that magazines would photograph. The pregnancy was textbook. Every ultrasound showed a healthy baby. Every test came back normal. Daniel was born at precisely 39 weeks, 8 pounds 2 ounces, with APGAR scores that indicated perfect health. They brought him home to a nursery designed by an interior decorator who'd flown in from New York, filled with organic cotton and Italian furniture and every luxury money could buy. He was perfect, Victoria whispered, her voice breaking. For 48 hours, he was absolutely perfect. Then the seizures started. She described the ambulance ride, the pediatric ICU, the doctors using terms like metabolic disorder and mitochondrial dysfunction. Genetic testing revealed a condition so rare it didn't have a common name. Just a string of letters and numbers that meant Daniel's cells couldn't process energy properly. His body was slowly poisoning itself, and there was nothing anyone could do. They gave us options. Experimental treatments that might buy weeks or months but would guarantee suffering, or we could make him comfortable and let him go peacefully. Robert had wanted to try everything, fight until the end, exhaust every possibility, spend millions if necessary. But Victoria had looked at their son, monitors and tubes invading his tiny body, his face peaceful in medically induced sleep, and known what the answer had to be. We held him while he died. 72 hours after his first seizure, with both of us wrapped around him, he just stopped breathing. Marcus's throat ached with unshed tears. He understood now why Victoria had looked at Emma with such desperate longing, why holding a healthy baby was both balm and torture. Robert blamed me for giving up too soon. I blamed him for wanting to prolong the inevitable. We destroyed each other in our grief. The divorce was finalized 6 months later. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. I threw myself into work because it was the only thing that made sense. Numbers don't betray you. Markets don't domam in your arms. Success became the only language I remembered how to speak. Marcus waited until she met his eyes. Jennifer hemorrhaged during delivery, internal bleeding the doctors didn't catch until it was too late. They worked on her for 40 minutes while I stood in the hallway holding Emma, trying to understand how I'd become a father and lost my wife in the same breath. He described the funeral, where Emma cried through the entire service. The first night alone with a newborn, terrified he'd do something wrong and lose her too. The months of stumbling through parenthood with no idea what he was doing, just barely keeping both of them alive. I haven't dated anyone since she died. Haven't even thought about it. Between work and Emma, I didn't have energy for anything else. And I couldn't imagine letting someone into this mess. He looked at Victoria, really looked at her, mascara smudged from crying, hair disheveled from Emma's grabby hands, looking nothing like the polished CEO from magazine covers. But then you showed up on that airplane and held my daughter like she mattered. And you told me about your son without flinching. And I realized maybe I don't have to do this alone anymore. Victoria shifted Emma to Marcus's lap, then moved closer. Her hand found his cheek, thumb brushing away tears he hadn't realized were falling. I'm afraid to love Emma and lose her. Marcus covered her hand with his. I'm afraid to love you and have you realize I'm not enough. You are enough, Victoria whispered. You're more than enough. You're someone who sees past the money and the title to the broken woman underneath. Someone who isn't afraid of my grief because you carry your own. Emma babbled between them, her tiny voice a counterpoint to their heavy words. She grabbed both their hands, pulling them together with the innocent certainty that these two people belonged in her orbit. Marcus leaned forward until his forehead rested against Victoria's. We're both terrified, but maybe that means we're doing something real. They stayed like that for a long moment, breathing the same air, while Emma played with their interlocked fingers. When they finally pulled apart, something had shifted. The fight had burned away the last pretense, leaving only truth. The next morning, Marcus woke to the smell of coffee and something sweet baking. He'd slept on the couch, giving Victoria his bedroom, a gesture of propriety that felt absurd given everything they'd shared. Emma's portable crib stood empty, soft sounds coming from the kitchen. He found Victoria at the stove, Emma perched on her hip while she flipped pancakes with practiced ease. She'd found ingredients Marcus didn't remember buying, probably walked to the corner store before he woke up. Her hair was twisted into a messy knot, and she wore one of Marcus's old flannel shirts over her expensive jeans. "Morning," and she offered without turning around. "I hope you don't mind. Emma woke up early and I thought I'd let you sleep." Marcus felt something catch in his chest, a glimpse of what normalcy might look like. Waking up to breakfast being made, to his daughter happy in someone else's arms, to the possibility of sharing these mundane morning rituals with another person. "You didn't have to. I wanted to." They ate pancakes while Emma made a spectacular mess with mashed banana. Victoria had her phone on the table, silenced but still vibrating with notifications she studiously ignored. Marcus knew her assistant was probably having a breakdown, trying to manage whatever chaos yesterday's photographs had triggered. Finally, Victoria picked up the phone, scrolling through messages with an expression that grew increasingly tense. She set it down with more force than necessary. "I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen before you decide I'm crazy." Marcus swallowed his coffee. "Okay." Victoria's fingers drummed against the table, a rare tell of nervousness. "I'm moving Sterling Technologies headquarters to Denver, 18-month transition starting in January." The words didn't immediately compute. Marcus stared at her, trying to process what she'd just said. Moving a Fortune 500 company's headquarters was a massive undertaking. Billions in logistics, thousands of employees affected, regulatory approvals and real estate deals, and complexity beyond his imagination. "What? Why?" San Francisco was Robert's choice. "Every street corner reminds me of when we were planning Daniel's nursery. The penthouse has a room I locked 5 years ago and haven't opened since. I've been stuck there, haunted by a life that doesn't exist anymore." She reached across the table, taking Marcus's hand. "Denver has everything we need: tech talent, lower operating costs, better quality of life metrics for employees. The board will fight it, but the numbers support the decision. I can make this happen." Marcus heard the unspoken part. "And there's someone here I want to build a life with, if he'll have me." "Victoria, you can't uproot an entire company because—" "I'm not doing it because of you. I'm doing it because I've spent 5 years in a city that feels like a beautiful prison. Because I'm tired of sacrificing personal happiness for professional success. Because I finally have a reason to want something more than quarterly earnings and shareholder value." She squeezed his hand harder. "I'm not asking for commitment today. I'm just saying I'm choosing to be here, near you and Emma. We can figure out the rest as we go." Marcus searched her face for doubt, for the calculating CEO who made decisions based on strategic advantage. Instead, he saw a woman who'd spent half a decade hiding from her own life and was finally ready to step back into it. "The board is going to lose their minds." "Probably, but they'll approve it because then supports the move. And because I'll make it clear that opposing me on this means finding a new CEO." She stood, moving around the table to stand beside him. "I know this is fast. I know we're barely figuring out what we are to each other. But I'm tired of being careful. Careful didn't save Daniel. Careful didn't make my marriage work. Careful has given me nothing but an empty penthouse and a reputation for being made of ice." Marcus pulled her down onto his lap, mindful of Emma watching from her high chair. "You're not made of ice. You're made of scar tissue and stubborn hope. Same as me." They spent Sunday at Washington Park. The forecast called for the last warm weekend before winter arrived in earnest, and families packed the green spaces accordingly. Marcus pushed Emma on the baby swings while Victoria stood behind, her hands steadying the motion. They looked like any other family enjoying the autumn sunshine. No photographers, no headlines, just 3 people existing together. Emma squealed with delight each time the swing reached its apex. Other parents nodded polite hellos as they passed, their children running between playground equipment with boundless energy. Marcus felt Victoria relax beside him, the constant tension she carried in her shoulders finally easing. An older woman approached the swings, gray hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, smile lines deep around her eyes. She stopped near Victoria, watching Emma with the expression grandmothers reserved for all babies. Your daughter is precious. You two make a beautiful family. Neither Marcus nor Victoria corrected her. Victoria's hand found Marcus's on the swing's chain, their fingers intertwining while Emma kicked her legs in ignorant joy. Thank you, Victoria managed, her voice thick with emotion. The woman continued on her walk, leaving them with the gift of her assumption. Marcus looked at Victoria, saw his own question reflected in her eyes. Is this what we're doing? Becoming a family? Victoria's smile was tentative but real. I think we already are. We just haven't admitted it yet. Marcus pulled out his phone, stepping back to capture the moment. Victoria's pushing Emma on the swing, both of them caught mid-laugh, the autumn light turning everything golden. He looked at the photo for a long moment before making a decision. He opened Facebook, an account he rarely used, filled mostly with coworkers and distant relatives. Posted the photo with a caption that felt both insignificant and monumental. Emma made a friend. We're grateful. Victoria saw him do it, understanding the weight of that public acknowledgement. Marcus was claiming her, or letting her claim him, or maybe they were claiming each other. Either way, it was real now. Visible. No longer something they could pretend was just two people helping each other through grief. They spent the rest of the afternoon at the park, letting Emma toddle between them on the grass. She'd mastered standing, but walking remained an adventure in controlled falling. Victoria hovered nearby, ready to catch her, while Marcus documented every stumble and triumph with his phone camera. As the sun began setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, they packed up Emma's scattered toys. Marcus lifted his daughter into his arms, and she immediately reached for Victoria. The gesture was instinctive, the kind of movement babies make toward people they trust completely. Victoria took Emma, holding her close, and Marcus saw her blink back tears. They walked to the truck together, Victoria still carrying Emma, and for the first time since Jennifer died, Marcus felt like he was building towards something instead of just surviving. Monday morning arrived with the weight of consequences. Victoria sat in Marcus's apartment, laptop balanced on her knees, while her board assembled in San Francisco for a video conference she'd scheduled with 4 hours' notice. Marcus had offered to take Emma out, give Victoria privacy, but she'd asked him to stay. I need to know someone's on my side, she'd said simply. The video call connected, showing 14 board members in the Sterling Technologies conference room. Richard Ashford sat at the head of the table, his expression already set to disapproving. Victoria didn't waste time with pleasantries. I'm calling to inform you of a strategic decision. Sterling Technologies will relocate its headquarters to Denver, Colorado. The transition will take 18 months, beginning first quarter of next year. The silence that followed lasted exactly 3 seconds before the room erupted. Multiple board members speaking over each other, Richard's voice rising above the chaos, demanding to know what she thought she was doing. Victoria waited for the noise to subside, her expression carved from marble. The data supports this move. Denver offers a 23% reduction in operating costs, access to emerging tech talent from University of Colorado and Colorado School of Mines, and quality of life metrics that will aid in recruitment and retention. I've already begun preliminary discussions with Colorado's Economic Development Office. They're prepared to offer significant tax incentives. Margaret Chen leaned forward. Victoria, this is an enormous undertaking. Have you considered the disruption to current operations? The employee relocation costs? The market perception? I've modeled every scenario. The initial investment is substantial, but ROI projections show we recoup costs within 36 months and see sustained benefits for the next decade. Employees will receive generous relocation packages. Those who choose not to move will have 18 months to transition or find positions at our San Francisco satellite office. Richard's face had gone red. This is insanity. You're uprooting an entire company on a whim. Victoria's voice dropped to absolute zero. I don't operate on whims, Richard. I operate on data. And the data says this move strengthens Sterling Technologies' competitive position while reducing overhead and expanding our talent pool. If you want to challenge the decision, review the full proposal I'm sending to your devices now. She clicked a button, sending a 100-page document she must have been preparing for weeks. The board members' screens lit up with charts and projections and endless spreadsheets supporting every claim she'd made. One more thing, Victoria continued, her tone shifting slightly. My personal life has been subject to media speculation recently. I'm addressing it now to prevent further distraction. She reached off screen, pulling Marcus into frame with her. He resisted for a moment, uncomfortable with being displayed like evidence. But Victoria's grip was firm. This is Marcus Hayes. We're together. He and his daughter are part of my life, and I'm done hiding that fact. This is not a scandal. This is two people who found each other through shared grief and built something meaningful. My relationship status doesn't affect quarterly earnings, which exceeded projections by 18% last quarter and are on track to do so again this quarter. Richard opened his mouth to protest, but Victoria steamrolled over him. I've spent 5 years prioritizing this company above everything else. I've delivered consistent growth, expanded market share, and increased shareholder value by 42% since taking this position. If my willingness to have a personal life is grounds for removal, then call a vote. Otherwise, this conversation is over. She ended the call before anyone could respond. The screen went dark, leaving her and Marcus in the sudden silence of the apartment. Victoria's hands were shaking, Marcus noticed. She'd just defied her entire board, publicly claimed a relationship that would dominate headlines, and announced a corporate restructuring that would affect thousands of lives. Marcus pulled her against him, feeling her trembling. That was terrifying, Victoria finished, but necessary. I'm tired of living in fear, tired of letting other people's expectations dictate my choices. Emma crawled over to them, babbling urgently as if she needed to be included in whatever serious discussion was happening. Marcus scooped her up, and the three of them sat tangled together on the couch while the world processed what Victoria had just done. Victoria's phone began vibrating, an endless stream of calls and messages that she ignored completely. Her assistant, PR team, board members, media outlets, the machinery of her public life demanding immediate attention. She silenced the phone and set it aside. Let them wait. 8 months later, Denver Botanic Gardens bloomed with late spring flowers. Marcus stood near the entrance to the Japanese garden, tugging at the collar of his new suit. Ray clapped him on the shoulder, grinning. Relax, man. This was your idea. I know, that doesn't make it less terrifying. Victoria had arrived in Denver permanently 3 months ago after overseeing the initial phases of Sterling Technologies' relocation. She'd bought a house in Cherry Creek, not a mansion, she'd insisted, just a 4-bedroom colonial that happened to sit on 2 acres. Emma had her own room there, filled with books and toys Victoria couldn't resist buying. They weren't married, hadn't even officially moved in together, though Marcus and Emma spent more nights at Victoria's house than his apartment. But they'd been building something steady and real. And 2 weeks ago, Marcus had suggested they make it official. Not marriage. Both of them carried too much baggage from previous attempts to rush that. But a commitment ceremony, a public declaration that they were choosing each other. Victoria had cried, then started planning with the same intensity she brought to corporate acquisitions. Now, 50 guests filled the garden's seating area. Ray and his girlfriend occupied the front row on Marcus's side. Victoria's assistant, Claire, sat with several Sterling executives who'd relocated to Denver. A few of Marcus's former co-workers from the distribution center, looking slightly uncomfortable in dress clothes. Victoria's mother flown in from Connecticut, holding Emma while the toddler tried to eat the flower petals she'd been given. Music started, something classical Marcus didn't recognize, but Victoria had chosen. He watched her appear at the garden entrance, walking alone because she'd said she didn't need anyone to give her away. She wore a simple cream dress, her hair loose around her shoulders, and Marcus forgot how to breathe. This woman who controlled boardrooms and commanded billions was walking toward him by choice, choosing him, choosing Emma, choosing a life that looked nothing like the one she'd planned. She reached him, took his hands, and for a moment they just stood there looking at each other while their guests waited. The officiant, a friend of Ray's who'd gotten ordained online specifically for this, cleared his throat. Marcus and Victoria have prepared their own vows. Marcus went first, his voice steady despite nerves. You taught me it's okay to accept help, to let someone in, to trust that Emma can have more than one person who loves her fiercely. You showed me that grief doesn't make us broken. It just makes us human. And you gave me permission to want something beyond survival. He squeezed her hands. I choose you. Today and tomorrow and all the messy days after that. You're not perfect. I'm not perfect. But together we're enough. Victoria's eyes were already wet when she began. You taught me that love doesn't replace what we lost. It adds to it. Daniel will always be my son. Jennifer will always be Emma's mother. But we honor them by choosing to live fully, not by hiding from feeling. Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper. You saw past the armor to the scared woman underneath. You didn't try to fix me or save me. You just stood beside me while we both figured out how to breathe again. I choose you, Marcus. I choose Emma. I choose this life we're building from broken pieces. They exchanged rings, simple bands, no diamonds, just solid gold that would last. The officiant pronounced them committed, and Marcus pulled Victoria into a kiss that felt like coming home. Emma squealed from the front row, demanding attention. They broke apart laughing, and Victoria scooped up the toddler who'd brought them together. Emma immediately grabbed both their faces, babbling something that sounded like approval. The reception was small and perfect. Local food instead of catering, a Spotify playlist instead of a DJ, folding chairs on grass instead of a ballroom. Victoria's sterling colleagues mingled with Marcus's warehouse friends, initial awkwardness dissolving into genuine conversation. Turns out warehouse logistics and tech operations had more in common than anyone expected. Ray gave a toast that made everyone laugh. I've known Marcus 8 years, never saw him look at anyone the way he looks at Victoria. Like she hung the moon and the stars and also might beat him at poker. And Victoria, you took a guy who was drowning and taught him how to swim. Or maybe you were both drowning and you figured out how to float together. Either way, I'm proud to call you family. Claire followed with her own toast, tears streaming. Victoria spent 5 years believing she was made of ice, but I've watched her thaw over these past months. Watched her remember how to be human. Marcus and Emma didn't fix her. They just reminded her that she was never really broken, just scared. Here's to being brave enough to try again. The afternoon dissolved into evening. Emma took her first real steps between Marcus and Victoria, stumbling across grass with determination while guests cheered. Someone started dancing to the music, and soon half the reception was swaying under string lights Victoria had insisted on hanging. Marcus found Victoria near sunset, standing slightly apart from the celebration. She was watching Emma play with Ray's girlfriend, her expression soft in the golden light. You okay? She leaned into him. I never thought I'd feel whole again. After Daniel, after Robert, after everything fell apart, I thought that was it. The rest of my life would just be managing damage and pretending to function. Marcus wrapped his arm around her waist. You're not whole. I'm not whole, but together, we're enough. The words echoed his vows, and Victoria smiled. Together, we're enough. Emma toddled over, demanding to be lifted. Marcus picked her up, and she immediately reached for Victoria. They stood there, the three of them, while the party continued around them. Not a traditional family, not a simple story, but real and messy and theirs. Victoria's mother approached, her expression softer than Marcus had ever seen it. You look happy, Victoria. Really happy. I haven't seen you look like this since before. She didn't finish the sentence. Didn't need to. They all knew the before she meant. Victoria nodded. I am happy, scared and uncertain and still figuring things out, but happy. Her mother squeezed her shoulder, then moved on to fuss over Emma. The party wound down as the sky darkened. Guests departed with hugs and congratulations, until only a handful remained. Ray helped and pack up chairs while Claire coordinated the cleanup crew Victoria had hired. Marcus and Victoria stood at the garden entrance, Emma asleep against Victoria's shoulder. The day had been perfect. Not magazine perfect, not Instagram perfect, but real and true and exactly what they needed. Ready to go home? Marcus asked. Victoria smiled, adjusting Emma's weight. Yeah, let's go home. They walked to the car through Denver's spring night, past blooming flowers and the last golden light fading from the sky. Emma slept on, oblivious to the significance of the day. But Marcus and Victoria understood. They'd both lost everything once. Both rebuilt their lives around surviving rather than living. Both believed second chances were for other people. And then a baby cried on an airplane, and everything changed. Victoria buckled Emma into her car seat while Marcus started the engine. As they pulled out of the parking lot, Victoria reached over and took his hand. No words needed, just the simple gesture of choosing each other again and again until choosing became as natural as breathing. The road stretched ahead through the city they'd both chosen, toward the house they were learning to share, toward the future they were building one messy day at a time. Not perfect, not easy, but theirs. And in the end, that was all that mattered. Two broken people who had found each other in the last place they expected, who'd built something real from the wreckage of their losses, who'd learned that healing didn't mean forgetting. It meant having the courage to love again, despite knowing how badly it could hurt. Marcus glanced at Victoria in the passenger seat, Emma sleeping in back, and felt something settle in his chest. Not the absence of grief, Jennifer's memory lived in him still, and Daniel's ghost would always haunt Victoria. But alongside the loss, something new had taken root. Hope, connection, the fragile beginning of joy. They drove through Denver as night fell completely, the city lights reflecting off Victoria's window. Tomorrow there would be work and responsibilities and all the complications of blending two very different lives. But tonight they were just three people heading home together. And for now, that was enough.